Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever wondered what the global pulse of a specific vital medication looks like? Today, we're peeling back the layers on a really fascinating report, the Global Heparin Sodium Injection Market Forecast for 2025 to 2033. And for anyone maybe not familiar, heparin is, well, it's a critical anticoagulant. It's widely used to prevent dangerous blood clots, think surgery patients, people with heart conditions, other high-risk situations. So, yeah, a truly vital medication.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here, I think, is how this single report gives us such a snapshot. It's not just about a pharmaceutical market, right?
Yeah.
It also gives us insights into broader healthcare trends, economic shifts, even evolving demographics across the world. We're going to be looking at data from 2021, projections for 2025, and then looking all the way out to 2033. Our mission really is to pull out the most important nuggets so you can walk away feeling exceptionally well informed.
Right. So, what does this all mean for the big picture then? Let's maybe start with the global numbers before we zoom into those fascinating regional details and see where the real action is happening. So, globally, the market was pushing nearly $5.8 billion. That was back in 2021. By 2025, it's projected to hit over $6.8 billion. And then by 2033, we're looking at a pretty substantial leap to more than $9.4 billion. That works out to a steady compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of just over 4.1%.
Yeah, and if we connect that to the bigger picture, this consistent growth, it isn't just random. It seems to be driven by, well, increasing global demand for this injection, obviously, but also general healthcare expansion worldwide, and crucially, improved access in what the report calls emerging regions. It really paints a picture of a steadily expanding need for this kind of anticoagulant care.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the sort of traditional powerhouses in this market, North America and Europe. They've historically held pretty significant shares. What are their projections telling us?
Well, in North America, the market was valued at about $2.3 billion in 2021, and it's projected to grow to over $3.6 billion by 2033. That maintains a steady seizure around 3.7%. The United States, as you'd probably expect, it continues to lead that regional market, went from roughly $1.8 billion in 2021 up to an estimated $2.7 billion by 2033. But interestingly, while the U.S. is dominant in just sheer size, Canada actually shows a notably higher growth rate, over 4.6%. And Mexico is also accelerating, jumping from about $257 million to over $421 million by 2033. That's a CAGR around 4.15%.
That's a really sharp observation. Because while the U.S. still holds, the biggest piece of the pie volume-wise,
Yeah.
those higher KGRs for Canada and Mexico within North America, they suggest some real dynamism there. Could be expanding patient populations, maybe more aggressive healthcare initiatives, making heparin more accessible in those countries. It's a good example of how even in these established markets, you can find these pockets of accelerated demand.
Absolutely. So what about Europe then? Across the pond, their market was valued at around $1.68 billion in 2021, projected to hit nearly $2.65 billion by 2033. That's a CAGR of about 3.8%. The UK and Germany, they both show substantial market values, but it's France that really stands out here. It's projected to jump from about $176 million to an impressive $313 million by 2033. And that registers the highest European CAGR at just over 5.1%.
France's growth rate is particularly fascinating, isn't it? In a mature market like Europe, seeing a KGR over 5% for a single country like that, it suggests some strong underlying factors are at play. Could be an aging population needing more anticoagulant care, or, like you said, maybe new national health programs boosting access to these vital meds. It's definitely a standout within that whole European landscape.
And digging a bit deeper into Europe, we see Italy with a healthy rise, Russia showing consistent growth too. Spain, on the other hand, projected at a slightly slower pace. Then you've got countries like Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Luxembourg, all showing more modest growth, sort of 1.2% to 2.3% CAGRs. But here's an interesting one. The rest of Europe category, it contributed significantly, yeah. And it actually registered the highest sub-regional CAGR in Europe at over 5.3%.
It really is interesting to see that. While these core European nations hold the large values, like you said, France, and notably that combined rest of Europe group, they're showing stronger growth rates. It indicates that even in these mature markets, there are these widespread, if sometimes smaller, pockets of accelerated demand. It kind of suggests that the factors driving the demand for heparin are quite diverse, even within just one continent.
That's a fascinating nuance. So even within these big established markets, we're seeing these unexpected areas of acceleration. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. While North America and Europe are dominant in sheer market size, the real acceleration, the momentum, seems to be happening elsewhere. Asia Pacific, South America, and especially Africa, they're projected to be key growth engines. Okay, let's start with Asia Pacific. This region's market value was around what, $1.08 billion in 2021, expected to rise to about $1.9 billion by 2033. That reflects a KGR of just over 5%. China leads the region, Japan follows pretty closely. But look at India, truly rapid expansion from about $154 million up to over $306 million, with a strong KGR topping 6.1%. And two other areas, Singapore and Southeast Asia, they're showing some of the highest KGRs in the entire report, both over 6.2%. That indicates some explosive growth there.
Yeah, the Asia-Pacific region is clearly a hotbed of growth right now. India's rapid expansion, plus Singapore and Southeast Asia leading the pack with those really impressive KGRs. It highlights increasing healthcare infrastructure, probably growing awareness of conditions needing heparin, and, expanding middle classes who can actually access more advanced medical care. It's a pretty clear indicator of how developing economies are driving pharmaceutical demand.
Right. Okay, moving south then, South America. Their market stood at about $378 million in 2021, projected to grow to over $681 million by 2033. That's a solid CAGR of over 5.2%. Brazil leads the region in market size, no surprise there. But what's particularly notable is that Argentina and Colombia are both expected to nearly double their market size by 2033.
Doubling, yeah. That strong growth in South America, especially that near doubling for Argentina and Colombia, it really underscores the expansion of healthcare access and medical procedures happening across the continent. It points to a broader trend, probably, of improved healthcare systems leading to greater use of essential medications like heparin.
Okay. And the Middle East. Market valued about $227 million in 2021, rising to roughly $301 million by 2033. Saudi Arabia held the highest market share here, growing from about $86 million to $112 million. However, some countries like Qatar and Turkey showed significantly lower growth rates. They're hovering around just 1.45%.
That contrast in the Middle East is quite telling. While Saudi Arabia maintains a significant market, that slower growth in other parts suggests a less uniform expansion over there. It suggests that while some areas are investing heavily in healthcare infrastructure and access, maybe others are lagging a bit, leading to a more varied demand picture.
Which brings us to maybe the most compelling story in this whole report. You mentioned a region that's showing the most explosive growth. Where should our attention be focused now?
Right, this raises that important question. Which region is showing the most explosive growth? And maybe surprisingly, maybe not. Africa takes the lead here. It's showing the highest regional growth rate across the board.
That's right. Africa's market grew from just over $122 million in 2021 to a projected $265 million by 2033. That's an impressive CAGR of over 7.2%. Nigeria and South Africa, they contributed significantly to this expansion, each growing close to 6.9%. And get this, the rest of Africa category had the highest sub-regional CAGR in the entire report at over 7.6%, marking it as a truly significant growth frontier for this market. Wow.
Africa's surge is, I think, a critical insight from this data. That impressive 7.2% overall CADR, and particularly the growth in that rest of Africa segment, it suggests a continent that's undergoing some rapid healthcare development. This probably isn't just about rising populations. It's likely a mix of expanding medical facilities, increasing access to basic healthcare, and maybe a greater awareness and diagnosis of conditions needing heparin. It really signals a major shift in global pharmaceutical demand patterns.
Something to truly watch. So, what does this all mean for you listening in? This deep dive into the heparin sodium injection market, it clearly shows consistent global growth, right? While North America and Europe are still the major players holding significant market value, the real momentum, the fastest expansion, it's undeniably happening in Asia Pacific, South America, and most notably, Africa.
Exactly. This comprehensive analysis highlights that clear trend. Global healthcare access and demand are not uniform, not at all. And we're seeing these significant shifts in where that growth is most pronounced. So this raises an important question for you to maybe consider. How might these varying growth rates in different regions, especially the surge we see in places like Africa or Southeast Asia, how might that impact global health initiatives, pharmaceutical supply chains, or even broader economic development and investment priorities in the coming decade?
Definitely something to mull over. We hope this deep dive gave you a valuable shortcut to being well-informed on this specific, yet, as we've seen, surprisingly dynamic global market. Keep exploring, and we'll be back with another deep dive soon. Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, I want you to picture this for a second. The quiet intensity of a hospital. Maybe it's a really busy ER or that, focused quiet you get in an operating theater. In these places, there's this Well, mostly unseen but totally essential element working away, keeping patients safe. It's heparin sodium injection. Honestly, it's a cornerstone of modern medicine. Just relied on constantly for how incredibly fast it works to stop dangerous blood clots from forming. We're talking about something used all the time during big surgeries, dialysis treatments, critical heart procedures. Yeah, it's foundational.
And what's really interesting and what makes this whole market so dynamic is why we're seeing this surge in demand right now. It's directly tied to the rise globally in cardiovascular problems and kidney disorders, things you've probably heard of like DVT, deep vein thrombosis, those nasty clots deep in the veins, or even pulmonary embolism, which is incredibly serious, where a clot shoots up to the lungs. So heparin isn't some, minor drug. Its importance is really growing. You feel it across hospitals, specialized centers everywhere. It's just cemented its role, both for routine stuff and those critical life or death emergency situations.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack this market for you. We want to dig into its absolutely vital role in medicine today, but also look hard at some of the big challenges it's facing. And honestly, some of these might surprise you, especially when we talk about where it actually comes from, its sourcing. It's quite a story. And then we'll pivot. Look at the innovations, the future trends that are reshaping this whole critical area of healthcare. We'll explore how science is trying to step up and solve these issues and what that could mean for patients all over the world. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more. We've established just how critical heparin sodium is, right? Preventing clots in so many vital procedures. But like anything important, it's got its complexities. Heparin's definitely no exception there. What are some of the main hurdles, the pain points maybe, that we see in the market right now?
Yeah, good question. Well, one of the first things that probably springs to mind is the potential for um, adverse reactions. I mean, it's highly effective, no doubt, but heparin can cause excessive bleeding. That's the most common issue, and it means you need really careful patient monitoring, constant vigilance. But then there's also something called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, or HIT. Now, this is rarer, thankfully, but it's serious. It's a kind of paradoxical reaction where the drug, believe it or not, actually causes a big drop in platelet count, which counterintuitively increases the risk of clots forming. It just highlights how carefully this has to be managed.
Wow, that's quite a tightrope to walk. So, with these known risks, it makes total sense that researchers are always looking for alternatives. What does that competition look like in the world of anticoagulants? And where does heparin still manage to hold its own?
Absolutely. And the landscape is changing. We've got low molecular weight heparins, LMWHs. They're essentially refined versions of standard heparin, sort of like heparin plus. They have advantages, like a more predictable effect on clotting, and often don't need that intense lab monitoring we just talked about. So they get used a lot, sometimes even for patients at home, outpatient care. And then you have the direct oral anticoagulants, the DOACs.
Yeah.
Things like apixaban, rivaroxaban, maybe you've seen ads for these. You take them by mouth, usually a fixed dose, no routine monitoring typically needed. They've really revolutionized long-term anticoagulation for a lot of people.
Okay, so if you've got these alternatives, some sound easier to manage. Why is heparin sodium still so fundamental? Why hasn't it been replaced?
That is a great question. And despite all that competition, heparin sodium keeps its critical place because of two key things. Its incredibly rapid onset of action and its extremely short half-life, which means basically it starts working fast almost immediately when given intravenously. And crucially, if a patient does start bleeding too much or suddenly needs emergency surgery, its effects can be stopped very quickly with a reversal agent. LMWHs, especially the DOACs, they just don't have that same immediate on-off switch. So that makes standard heparin absolutely indispensable for acute situations, the critical care, major surgery, ER settings. It's unique in that way.
Ah, okay. That distinction really clarifies its unique value proposition, doesn't it? That speed and reversibility.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, hinted really, that one of the most surprising challenges is about where it comes from, its origin. How is heparin sodium actually made? And why does that make the supply chain, as you put it, so vulnerable?
Right. This is where it gets really fascinating and frankly a bit concerning. Unlike so many modern drugs that are synthesized, built molecule by molecule in a lab, the heparin sodium that's overwhelmingly used today is still derived from animal tissues. Mostly it comes from the mucosal tissues of pig intestines.
From pigs.
Yes. And think about the global demand for this essential drug. It means we rely on this huge, complex, interconnected global supply chain. And that chain is, well, it's pretty fragile. It's vulnerable to all sorts of things. Animal disease outbreaks like swine flu variants can absolutely devastate the supply of raw material. Geopolitical issues can disrupt trade routes or sourcing. And there have been serious issues in the past with product contamination or adulteration, which obviously raised huge safety flags.
Right, I remember hearing about that.
Exactly. So it means that this incredibly critical drug, this blood thinner we rely on, is dependent on a natural resource that has all these built-in vulnerabilities. And that can, and sometimes does, lead to drug shortages. Shortages that have a direct, immediate impact on patient care around the world.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? Something so advanced in its medical application relies on something so fundamentally natural and potentially precarious. So, given this reliance, this dependence on a vulnerable natural source, what's happening on the science side? What breakthroughs are aiming to fix this supply chain fragility? What's the future look like for where heparin comes from?
Yeah, it's a huge focus, as you can imagine. It's a major area of research and development. The big push, really, is towards developing synthetic and bioengineered heparins. The goal here is simple: create versions that don't rely on animal sources at all, which would immediately mean a more stable, consistent, and potentially safer supply.
That sounds ideal.
Think about it, right? No more worries about animal diseases impacting the drug supply. You sidestep some ethical concerns certain users might have. And you get a much more controlled, standardized manufacturing process, less batch-to-batch variation. These new approaches also hope to create heparins that maybe have fewer side effects, like reducing the risk of HIT, or perhaps even more targeted actions in the body. Now, it's incredibly complex science. Mimicking what nature perfected over millennia isn't easy, but the potential upside for global health is just immense.
That really would be a game changer if they can get that technology scaled up effectively. Okay, so that's the lab side. What about the market itself globally? How is that shifting? Where are we seeing the biggest changes in terms of, say, demand and patient access?
Well, connecting this to the broader picture, you see the global healthcare map changing rapidly. We're definitely seeing a significant expansion of the heparin sodium market and anticoagulants generally into emerging economies, particularly across the Asia-Pacific region, Latin America, and also parts of Africa.
What's driving that?
It's a mix of factors. Improving healthcare infrastructure in many of these countries plays a big role. Rising disposable incomes mean more people can access treatments, and unfortunately, it's also linked to the increasing prevalence of non-communicable diseases, heart disease, stroke, kidney problems of these populations. Lifestyle changes are contributing. So this expansion is good news in terms of patient access potentially improving, but it also puts new strains on that already fragile global supply chain we talked about, which again makes that synthetic heparin research even more vital.
Right, it all connects back. And just thinking practically, on the ground, in the clinic or the hospital ward, how are the methods of actually giving heparin improving to make it safer, maybe more efficient for nurses and doctors?
That's another key area of practical improvement. We're seeing a definite shift towards using prefilled syringes and single-dose vials or solutions. Historically, a nurse might have to draw up a precise dose of heparin from a larger multi-dose vial. That process involves more steps, more handling, and it inherently carries a higher risk of dosage errors or even bacterial contamination.
Makes sense.
Exactly. Prefilled syringes, though, they come ready to go. The dose is already measured out. It just streamlines the whole administration process, cuts down on preparation time for busy staff, and most importantly, it significantly boosts patient safety by minimizing those potential dosing mistakes and contamination risks. It's an efficiency gain, sure, but it's really about safety when, every second can count in places like the OR or ICU.
Okay, so we've just taken quite a journey, a real deep dive through the heparin sodium injection market. We've really established its undeniable importance, haven't we? Preventing those dangerous blood clots, absolutely essential in everything from, complex surgeries to urgent emergency care. But we also got into the weeds on the significant challenges it faces. Things like the serious adverse reactions it can cause, that risk of excessive bleeding, or that paradoxical HIT, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Both really highlight why careful monitoring is so critical. And yeah, the competition, that's always there, isn't it? From alternatives like the low molecular weight heparins and the direct oral anticoagulants, each carving out their own space. But I think what really stood out, for me at least, was that inherent vulnerability baked into its supply chain, that reliance primarily on animal sources, mostly pigs, and the huge implications that fragility has.
Absolutely. And if we kind of zoom out and connect the dots, it's clear that innovation is really the driving force trying to overcome those very specific challenges. We talked about that groundbreaking research into synthetic and bioengineered heparins that's directly aimed at improving the supply chain's consistency, cutting down contamination risks, and maybe even reducing those adverse effects we mentioned. What's also really compelling is seeing the market expand globally. Getting these therapies into emerging healthcare systems across Asia Pacific, Latin America, Africa, that reflects a much broader shift in global health needs and capabilities. And then there's the practical side, the clinical efficiency and safety angle, that crucial move towards pre-filled syringes and single-dose solutions, streamlining how it's given when precision and speed are just non-negotiable.
You know, this whole conversation raises a really important question for you listening right now to think about. How do the challenges and the innovations we've discussed within this, well, seemingly quite niche area of heparin sodium injections, how do they actually mirror broader trends happening across global healthcare? Think about that constant balancing act. On one hand, using established, naturally sourced medications like heparin, things that have proven their worth over decades, versus, on the other hand, that urgent push driven by science and need to create more resilient, perhaps safer, and definitely more globally accessible treatments for critical care. It's a tension, a balance playing out in so many areas of medicine. Heparin is just one really powerful, really compelling example. What other parts of healthcare might be facing similar dilemmas right now, and how are we trying to innovate our way forward? Something to perhaps mull over until our next deep dive.